Austin Mayor Steve Adler is joining us after spending 4 days in Los Angeles and Seattle. He wanted to see what those cities are doing right and what they learned from those previous mistakes they've made. We'll get into some of those specifics in a moment, but Mayor Adler, thank you for joining us. You just got off your flight not too long ago to be here this morning, so we do appreciate that.
Thanks for the invitation.
Since you're here and you just got off the plane and that trip, what are some of the takeaways, the big ones at least, that you're bringing with you this morning?
Well, we've been talking to those cities and other cities for a long time. But it was good to actually be there on the ground. I think there were two confirmations.
Okay.
And the first one is that you have to act decisively and in grand ways if you're going to stop a spiraling challenge. I think both LA and Seattle wish they had acted more decisively and in bigger ways 5 years ago and 10 years ago, and that's where we are now. And the second thing, I think, is that we have to recognize that there are two sides to the same coin. Okay. We have to make sure that we identify places where people cannot camp, sit, and lie, but we can only do that if we identify places where people can be. So when we go to somebody and say, you can't be there, and they look at us and say, okay, well then where do you want me to be? We have to have an answer. So we have to provide more beds in this city. We have to provide more homes in this city. That's really the only way. Just doing either half of that sentence, it's an incomplete sentence and it doesn't work. We just can't move people around the city, because if you tell them you can't be there, then they just move somewhere else, and then you just move people around. It does not help with the challenge. That's what Seattle and LA did for too long, and we have to do better.
We want to talk about those homeless ordinances that were passed just last month. A lot of people say that they're seeing a lot of tents pop up now throughout the streets. Some homeless people that we've talked to have said that that wasn't because they ran out and bought more tents because of these changes. They're saying that it's the police are not making them take them down as much as they maybe used to. Do you think that that particular part of the ordinance is working? Because some people have criticized that particular aspect of it.
I think the most important thing we did in June, and no one's really talking about it, and I think it was the most important thing, was we asked the manager to come back in August and tell us not only where people can't be, but also where people can be. What are the reasonable time and place restrictions that we should have in this city? The courts are telling us that you can't tell people they can't camp unless you're also telling them where they can. We started that activity in June, but it's obviously an incomplete sentence. You know, we shouldn't have people camping on our busiest, most pedestrian-oriented areas like Congress Avenue, near traffic, next to the entry of businesses and homes. But we can't do that unless we're also prepared to step forward and find places for people to live. And that is a hard thing to do for two reasons. The first is it costs money, and then we're going to have to spend money to do this, which means we're not going to be spending money somewhere else. And second, no one wants these things located anywhere. And as a community, we're going to have to recognize that we're going to have to locate some of these. But then it's incumbent upon the city to do it in a way that is not disruptive to the neighborhoods. In other words, nothing that looks like the Arch, no people gathering outside, no drop-ins, people just going there by appointment and by referral. We can get this done, but we have to do both halves of that same sentence.
And while you were on your trip, you were tweeting quite a bit. We want to pull up one tweet that you did showing a Los Angeles shelter, and no one was in line there, which, again, you mentioned the Arch, which we don't really see around here. We see that a lot. What can Austin learn from that particular situation?
We can learn a lot. You can learn that you can, in fact, do shelters that don't look like the Arch. You just have to set the rules and the process up. And we're going to have to do that, because when we start locating these, we know that if we can't make the first one work well, we're never going to get a chance to do a second, a third, and a fourth. But we're going to have to do that, because, again, the only way we're going to be able to succeed in this challenge is to treat it like a crisis, which means it's all hands on deck right now. Let's not wait. And second, if we actually find people homes.
While you were gone, Governor Greg Abbott mentioned a possible solution a little bit closer to home. He said that San Antonio really should serve as a model to help people dealing with homelessness. Do you agree with that? And why or why not?
Well, you know, San Antonio has a model that they use. We've been looking at it for 10 years. People from our city regularly go down there. We also have programs in Austin in our city that are also working well. San Antonio and Austin were among few cities to be able to get to net effective veterans homelessness. The city of Austin last year took half of the homeless children off our streets that were homeless. The model in San Antonio has some advantages and some disadvantages. The programs we're doing in Austin is the same way. But ultimately, that model, that particular program that the governor mentioned, looks in some respects like the Arch. It's just inside in a courtyard area. And I think we can do better than that in this city.
We also asked a lot of our viewers to send in questions to you, and we did get a lot. So unfortunately, we can't touch on all of them. Otherwise, we would be here probably all day, Mayor. But this one we wanted to ask you. Ann Henson wrote in that many are having to look elsewhere for a place to live because of taxes, traffic, and tired of being accosted at every corner and stoplight. How can you justify spending taxpayer money on those who contribute nothing? How do you respond to somebody who makes that kind of claim?
Well, I think that one, you know, any kind of society will ultimately be measured, I think, by how they treat the least fortunate among them. So I think we have a moral obligation. We also have a practical obligation. The fact that there are folks experiencing homeless in our community is a given. It's a truth. Those folks exist here. They exist in other cities. And we're either going to do something about it, we're either going to help those people, most of whom can get back on their feet if we can actually get them a home. But if we don't put resources against it, all we have to do is look to Los Angeles and San Francisco and Seattle and Portland to see what will happen with us. You know, in Seattle, there are 200,000 fewer people than in Austin. They have 6 times as many folks that are experiencing homelessness. In LA, there are 40,000 homeless people in their city. You know, they're putting resources against that. The state of California just agreed to give Los Angeles $145 million. It'd be really nice to have some support like that from our state. There's a representative, Maxine Waters, that's filed legislation in Washington to have $30 billion coming from the federal government to help cities. We need that kind of help, but we're not going to wait for it. We're going to have to start doing things here.
Another viewer sent in a question that echoed some of the other ones that we saw. Why wasn't this trip taken before the new homeless ordinance was enacted last month?
Well, we've been in conversations with cities and with leaders around the country and other cities for years now. You know, I had the opportunity to go through Skid Row with the lieutenant in charge with the Los Angeles Police Department, but I already knew what it looked like. I had seen a lot of pictures and had talked to a lot of people about it. I was able to meet with the mayors of both Los Angeles and Seattle, but I've had dozens of conversations with them prior to last week. So it was an important trip to make, to see things on the ground. We were there with a group from Austin looking at mobility issues as well. So we had the information to start the process in June, but remember, the most important thing we passed in June was the requirement for our manager to come back in August and help us start defining over time where people both can and cannot camp, sit, and lie.
You obviously touched on the final topic I want to ask about as well, is that you went to those cities to talk about mobility and transportation. You did tweet out another picture of your ride from the airport to your hotel in downtown Seattle. Is that something that can be replicated? We point out the Blue Line here, Cat Metro's Blue Line might be able to accomplish something like that. Briefly, is that possible for us as well here in Austin?
Boy, I tell you, it's not only possible, but I sure hope that it happens. We need a high-capacity, rapid, mass public transit system in this city. I would love for us to be able to get on something at the airport that would whisk us into downtown or in other parts of the city. We're in the process of discussing that publicly. We're going to make some choices on that plan as a community this fall, early next year. My hope is that on the ballot of 2020, the citizens of Austin, Texas will have before them a proposal to do a regional mass transit rapid system in our city.
we'll have to see what comes of it. Mayor,
right.
thank you so much for joining us. And again, we could have asked you so many more questions, but we do appreciate your time this morning.
I'll be around. Thank you.